Every Tuesday morning for 9 straight years, the same unmarked refrigerated van backed into the loading dock of a small food pantry on the east side of Dayton, Ohio, and left behind whatever the regional hospital system's cafeteria couldn't use. Dented cans with torn labels, dairy products within 48 hours of expiration, bread that had gone stiff, produce that looked fine from one side and didn't from the other. No note, no contact person, no phone number to call if something was wrong. Just a donation log sheet clipped to the side of the van, a signature line, and a timestamp that said the hospital had met its community outreach quota for the week. The man who signed for every delivery was always the same. He arrived before anyone else, unlocked the side door with a key on a ring that also held a small photo laminate of a woman smiling at the beach, sorted through what was salvageable before the volunteers arrived, and never once complained to anyone about the quality of what came off that van. His name was Leonard Quill. He was 43 years old, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of face that had once open and easy and had since grown quieter, the way faces do when grief moves in and doesn't fully move out. He had dark circles that no amount of sleep seemed to fix. He drove a 2009 Chevy Malibu with a cracked dashboard and a back seat permanently dusted with glitter from his daughter's art projects. The pantry was called Steadfast Community Table. Leonard had not founded it. He had inherited it, informally, from a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Ormsby who had run it out of a church basement for 11 years before her knees gave out, and she needed someone she trusted to take over. Leonard had been volunteering there since his wife, Claire, had first dragged him in on a Saturday morning 7 years earlier, telling him it would do him good to get out of his own head for a few hours. Claire had been right about most things. She had been right about that too. She died 14 months later, from an aggressive form of ovarian cancer that the doctors found too late and moved too fast, and Leonard had continued showing up at Steadfast every week, because stopping felt like losing something else he couldn't afford to lose. His daughter was named Willa. She was 6 when Claire died. She was 15 now, a quiet girl, with her mother's dark eyes, and her father's habit of thinking before speaking, which in a teenager looked sometimes like moodiness, and was actually just depth. She did homework on a folding table near the pantry's back office on the afternoons. Leonard couldn't arrange a ride home from school. She knew the names of every regular who came through. She had opinions about the best way to organize canned goods, and was not shy about sharing them. Leonard's actual job, the one that paid the small amount that the pantry's director's stipend did not, was as a dietary aide at Hargrove Regional Medical Center, the same hospital system whose unmarked van arrived every Tuesday with whatever it didn't want anymore. He worked the early shift in the cafeteria, starting at 5 in the morning, plating breakfast trays for patients, running food carts through hallways that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, learning which nurses preferred their coffee black and which attending physicians got irritable if the scrambled eggs were watery. He was not a chef. He had never claimed to be. But he had been cooking since he was 11 years old, feeding his younger siblings while his mother worked double shifts, and he understood food the way some people understand music. Not theoretically, but in the body intuitively, through years of practice that never felt like practice because it was just life. He had applied for a position in Hargrove Regional's actual kitchen, the one that served the hospital's executive dining room and catered the quarterly board luncheons and the donor galas, twice. The first time, 5 years ago, he had been told the position required a culinary degree. The second time, 3 years ago, he had been told the position had been filled internally. He had gone back to plating breakfast trays. He had not applied a third time. What he did instead, quietly and without fanfare, was fix everything at Steadfast that the hospital's donations broke. When the dairy came in already sour, he used it in baked goods. When the produce arrived bruised and soft, he turned it into soups and sauces that the pantry's weekly hot meal program served on Thursdays. When bread went stiff, he made croutons or breadcrumbs or French toast casserole for the weekend breakfast service. He had a notebook, spiral-bound and coffee-stained, where he tracked what came in, and what he could make from it, and how much it had fed. The volunteers called it the miracle book. Leonard called it math. What no one outside Steadfast fully understood was how much of that math depended on what the hospital threw away. Over 9 years, Leonard had quietly transformed what arrived as waste into roughly 4,000 prepared meals per year. He had never calculated that number himself. He didn't think in those terms, he thought in Tuesday mornings and expiration dates, and whether he had enough onions to stretch a soup another batch. Hargrove Regional Medical Center was run by a woman named Sandra Croft. She had been chief executive for 6 years, brought in from a larger health system in Atlanta to modernize Hargrove's operations and expand its regional footprint. She was 51, precise, with a reputation for making decisions quickly and following through on them completely. She had increased Hargrove's operating revenue by 31% in 5 years. She had opened 2 satellite clinics and negotiated a partnership with a university medical program. She had won a Regional Business Leadership Award 2 years running. She had never, not once, visited Steadfast Community Table, despite signing the annual community benefit report that listed it as a primary beneficiary of Hargrove's food donation program. To Sandra, Steadfast was a line item. It satisfied a regulatory requirement under the hospital's nonprofit status. It appeared favorably in grant applications. It looked good in the annual report's community section, which was printed on heavier paper stock than the rest of the document. The people who actually operated it were, as far as she was aware, handled by the Volunteer Coordination Office. That changed on a Wednesday, in early November, when Sandra's executive team received the results of an external audit commissioned by the State Health Department. The audit had several findings. The one that mattered most was this: Hargrove Regional's food donation program had been in technical violation of safe food handling regulations for an undetermined period of time. Specifically, the refrigerated transport procedures for perishable items did not meet the temperature documentation standards required under the state's updated Food Safety Code. The van that delivered to Steadfast and to 11 other community organizations across the county had not been logging internal temperature readings at the intervals the new code required. It was, in the scale of regulatory findings, a moderate problem. Not a crisis, but it required immediate remediation, documentation, and a formal response plan submitted within 30 days. Sandra's compliance officer, a careful man named Peter Ashby, who had been with Hargrove for 12 years, brought it to her attention the morning the audit results arrived. He also mentioned, quietly, that the food donation program had been operating under a policy framework that hadn't been substantially updated since before Sandra's tenure. Sandra asked for a full briefing. She got one. And in the middle of that briefing, when Peter was walking her through the list of recipient organizations and the volume of food each received, he mentioned that Steadfast Community Table was, by a significant margin, the highest volume recipient. He mentioned that it ran a hot meal program. He mentioned that its director, a dietary aide at Hargrove, as it happened, had been receiving and processing donations from the hospital for 9 years. Sandra looked up from the report. A dietary aide, Leonard Quill, Peter said. Early shift, cafeteria. He's been running the pantry as a volunteer director on top of his regular hours. There was a silence. And no one in the community outreach office has a relationship with him? He communicates with the van driver and signs the delivery log, that's the extent of it. Sandra set down the report. She looked at the window for a moment, then she said, "Get me a meeting." Peter called the number on file for Steadfast Community Table. It rang 4 times and went to a voicemail that said, "You've reached Steadfast Community Table in Dayton. We're probably here, just busy. Leave a message and we'll call you back. If this is about a donation pickup, please call back after 3. In the background, faintly, someone was laughing. Leonard got the message during his lunch break and called back from the parking lot of the hospital. Standing next to his Malibu, in 38-degree weather. Because the break room was loud, and he preferred quiet. He was told that the CEO would like to meet with him regarding the food donation program and the audit findings. He said that was fine. He said Tuesday worked. Then he went back inside and plated 47 lunch trays before his shift ended. He did not tell Willa about the meeting. He didn't want to make it into something before he knew what it was. The morning of the meeting, Leonard drove to Steadfast first, because it was Tuesday, and the van came on Tuesdays. It arrived at 7:12, as usual. The driver, a man named Gil, who had been making this route for 6 years, backed in and dropped the gate and started handing things down, while Leonard checked them against the manifest. The dairy was fine, the produce was mostly good, 2 boxes of bell peppers going soft on one end. The bread was day-old sandwich loaves, still usable. There was also, this week, a full case of individually portioned yogurt cups, sealed and within date, which had apparently been ordered in excess for a patient program that got cancelled. Leonard signed the log. Gil drove away. Leonard carried everything inside, started sorting, texted the Thursday meal program volunteer coordinator about the peppers, and wrote in his notebook, Tuesday 11/7, bell peppers, roasted soup or stuffed, yogurt, Thursday breakfast service or weekend bag program, bread, croutons plus French toast bake. Then he washed his hands, changed his shirt in the back office, and drove to the hospital. Sandra Croft's office was on the 4th floor of the administrative wing, behind a glass-walled reception area, with a view of the parking structure. Her assistant brought Leonard a cup of coffee, without asking if he wanted one, which he appreciated. He sat in a chair that probably cost more than his monthly car payment, and waited. Sandra came in 2 minutes later, shook his hand and sat across from him rather than behind her desk. He noticed that it was either a calculated gesture or a genuine one, and he wasn't sure yet which. She opened by explaining the audit findings in plain terms. She did not use the word crisis. She used the word compliance gap, and then, to her credit, seemed to hear how that sounded and said, which means we've been doing this carelessly, and need to do better. Leonard found that he respected the correction. She walked through what Hargrove needed to do to remediate the violation. Updated temperature logging, documentation protocols, a revised food safety plan for all donation recipients. Then she said, I pulled the records for Steadfast. 9 years of deliveries. The volume you've received is substantial. Leonard nodded. What do you do with it? She asked, and the way she asked it, not perfunctory, not bureaucratic, but genuinely curious, leaning forward slightly, made him think she actually wanted to know. So he told her. Not everything, not immediately, but he started talking, and found he didn't stop for a while. He told her about the Thursday meal program, the weekend bag program for families who ran short between food stamp disbursements, the cooking he did with damaged produce, because throwing food away felt like a personal failure, the notebook, the math, the 4 years it had taken to build enough trust with the neighborhood that people came reliably, because food pantries in communities that had been disappointed before had to earn that trust the slow way. Sandra listened. She asked questions that were specific, and not stupid. She asked what the biggest gaps were in what the donation stream provided. Leonard said protein, reliably, shelf-stable protein was always short. She wrote that down. She asked what Hargrove could do better in terms of what it sent. Leonard paused for a moment, and then said, carefully, that the temperature documentation issue aside, the more significant problem was predictability. Some weeks the donations were generous. Some weeks they were minimal. Planning a meal program around an unpredictable supply stream meant he was always improvising, which he didn't mind doing, but it made it hard to communicate with the families, who depended on the Thursday meals about what to expect. Sandra said, that's a legitimate operational failure on our end. She meant it as an acknowledgement. Leonard heard something else in it, a woman confronting a gap between what she had been told her organization was doing and what it was actually doing. He had seen that look before, not often, but he recognized it. After about 40 minutes, Sandra closed her notebook and said she would like to visit Steadfast. Not for the audit, not for a photo, just to understand what she was actually looking at. Leonard said Thursday was the hot meal day, if she wanted to see it operating. She came on Thursday. No communications staff, no executive assistant, no camera. She arrived at 11:30 in a dark coat with a tote bag over her shoulder and stood near the door for a moment before Leonard waved her in. The place was not impressive to look at. Folding tables, mismatched chairs, hand-painted signs on the walls that Willa had made during a summer project 2 years ago that said things like everyone eats, here and your table is waiting. Industrial shelving along the back wall. A kitchen that had been a church storage room and still sometimes smelled faintly of old hymnals. But at noon, when the doors opened and people started coming in, Sandra stood off to one side and watched. She watched Leonard's volunteers move, with the ease of people who had done this enough times that they had stopped thinking about it and were just doing it. She watched Leonard behind the serving counter, remembering names, asking about kids and jobs and health issues, with the specificity of someone who had been paying attention for years. She watched Willa, who had come directly from school in her backpack and coat, help a woman with a toddler get her tray to a table without spilling anything. At one point, a man in his 70s came through the line and said to Leonard, quietly, "My daughter's getting married next month," and Leonard said, "I know, you told me. Congratulations again, Walter, save me some cake." And the old man laughed in a way that reached his whole face. Sandra stood there and felt the specific discomfort of someone who has been efficiently managing something from a distance and has just seen what it actually is up close. She stayed for 2 hours. She helped clear tables during the second service. She was not elegant about it, but she was willing. Before she left, she stood with Leonard in the kitchen for a few minutes, while he started breaking down the service area. "How long has it been since you applied for a kitchen position here?" she asked. Leonard looked up. "You read my file." "I did." He was quiet for a moment. 3 years since the last time. 5 years since the first. Why didn't you apply again?" He thought about how to answer that without it sounding like an accusation or a surrender. He settled on the truth. "I figured the answer was going to be the same." Sandra nodded slowly. She did not apologize. He didn't want an apology. He was past the age where apologies for institutional failures meant much to him. But she said, "I'd like to have a different conversation. About what you're doing here, and what Hargrove could be doing with you, if you're open to it." He said he was open to it. He did not say that he'd been open to it for years and nobody had knocked. He didn't need to. What followed was not a fairy tale. Leonard would be the first to tell you that. It was a series of meetings, some of them tedious, some of them genuinely interesting, that stretched over about 2 months. Sandra proposed a partnership structure that would formalize Steadfast's relationship with Hargrove. Real funding, not just waste diversion, a dedicated liaison. A protocol for protein donations that addressed what Leonard had said about the gap. She also proposed something more specific. A staff position at Hargrove, a newly created role in community nutrition programming, that would involve both the food pantry work and a direct connection to the hospital's patient education and discharge planning teams, helping develop food resources for patients managing chronic conditions who often went home to food-insecure households. The role had not existed before. Sandra had created it in the weeks after the Thursday visit. Leonard knew this because Peter Ashby told him, somewhat indiscreetly, in the elevator one afternoon. Leonard's conditions were straightforward. Flexible hours that allowed him to remain present for Willa's school schedule and the things a 15-year-old needed a parent present for. Real authority over Steadfast programming, not just consultation, and the same salary the position was budgeted at, not a discounted rate because of his background. Sandra agreed to all three without negotiating. Leonard found that significant. He started the new role in January. The first thing he did was update the intake system for the donation program. Temperature logs, documentation. A checklist that the van drivers actually found usable rather than burdensome. Peter said the compliance officer had been trying to solve that problem for 4 months. Leonard had done it in a week, because he understood both ends of the transaction. The second thing he did was reach out to the dietary department, at a retirement community 12 miles away, that had been quietly discarding a similar volume of usable food every week, and set up a secondary donation arrangement that, within 3 months, added another 60 families to Steadfast's weekly distribution. Willa thought it was pretty cool that her dad was fixing hospital problems now. She didn't say this directly. She said, "You're kind of like a tea support, except for food." Leonard had laughed harder than he had in a while. Sandra visited Steadfast 3 more times in that first year. Not for tours. Not for the annual report. Just because she had started to understand that being close to the work mattered, and she was trying to build that back into how she operated. She wasn't always comfortable. The pantry was not a comfortable place, in the way that boardrooms are comfortable. People came there because they needed to. That need was visible and immediate in a way that spreadsheets made abstract. She was learning, slowly, to sit with that visibility, instead of translating it into data as quickly as possible. One Tuesday morning in March, the regular unmarked van arrived as always. But the driver this time was someone new, a younger man Leonard hadn't met, and he had the updated temperature log on a tablet instead of the old paper sheet, and the documentation was complete. and the food was cold at the right temperature, and there was a note clipped to the manifest. Not from Sandra, from the cafeteria manager Leonard had worked beside for 4 years, a woman named Faye, who wrote in purple pen, "Thought you could use these, we ordered too many, Faye." 2 cases of individually vacuum-sealed salmon fillets, frozen solid, within date. Leonard stood in the loading dock in the cold morning air and read that note twice. Then he went inside and wrote in his notebook. Tuesday 3:14, salmon, Thursday meal program, will need lemon, check produce delivery. He put the notebook back in his apron pocket and got to work. Some people spend years keeping a system running that was never designed to notice them. They show up early and stay late, and sign the paperwork, and make the math work. And don't complain, because complaining doesn't feed anyone. They build something real and functional and human out of what other people throw away. And they do it quietly, and the only record of it is a spiral-bound notebook that smells like coffee, and a daughter who knows the names of everyone who comes through the door. The system doesn't usually come looking for those people. It doesn't know how to look, because it was built to measure things that are easy to measure. And what those people do is the hardest thing to quantify. They make a community out of what everyone else called surplus. Sometimes, though, something breaks. An audit, a compliance gap, a moment when someone in a position to look actually looks. And sometimes the person who answers the door has been there the whole time, waiting not for recognition, but for the chance to do the work properly, with the resources it deserved, and the respect that made it sustainable. Leonard Quill had not been waiting for rescue. He had been working. There is a difference, and it matters more than most people realize, until they are standing in a church basement kitchen at noon, on a Thursday, watching someone hand a warm meal to a stranger and call them by name.